Meanwhile, on America's southern border, the city where the family separation policy was first launched, El Paso, Texas, is still receiving migrants fleeing violence from Central America and Mexico. Many of them seek legal asylum upon entry. U.S. officials have maintained that potential asylum seekers entering at the legal border crossings will not be prosecuted and will be processed in turn. But as Amna Nawaz has found in this cross-border report from Juarez and El Paso, the process isn't always that easy.
The years that brought Angelica and Sophie, her 3-year-old granddaughter, to this moment on the Mexican side of the Paso del Norte bridge to the United States are almost too painful for her to recount. When we first met them Tuesday night, they had already been in this migrant shelter in Juarez for a month. Her family, Angelica says, was targeted by Mexican cartels, already killing her husband, son, daughter-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. Getting out of Mexico, she says, is a matter of life or death.
I'm worried for her. My granddaughters live through many very ugly things.
Children are separated from their parents or guardians. Are you worried about that?
Yes, it makes me afraid that they'll separate me from my granddaughter, and I pray that they won't separate me from her.
Her plan is to try and legally cross the U.S. border Wednesday morning, escorted by Ruben Garcia, who runs a migrant shelter across the border in El Paso. Angelica will carry this sign, announcing to U.S. Border Protection that she's scared for her life and wants to seek asylum in America.
Here are the flags, and there is the boundary.
Garcia has been helping and housing migrants fleeing violence for 40 years. Lately, he says, even potential asylum seekers crossing legally have been criminalized. Wednesday, and a crowd gathers on the Mexican side of the bridge.
It is 7:18 in the morning right now. Angelica and her granddaughter just got here. There's a lot of press. As you can see, the advocates who are trying to get her across the border think that the more attention is paid to her, the more likely she's going to be able to cross.
Another family, a mother with her 3 kids, will also attempt to cross, seeking asylum with the group. All the waiting and all the attention has Angelica more worried than ever.
I just want to know Angelica, how are you feeling right now?
Con miedo.
Fearful.
What are you afraid of?
How the U.S. government will respond when I ask for asylum.
Just after 7:30 a.m., the group begins to walk. This journey of a few hundred yards can take a matter of minutes. But Angelica and Sophie are stopped by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, at the international boundary before they can set foot on U.S. soil and make an asylum claim. A standoff ensues.
When people who have already suffered tremendously are sent back into an environment where they are genuinely afraid to be found, I can't see how that could be considered human.
If capacity wasn't the issue, I guarantee you I'd be allowing people to come forward right now.
Stopped before even reaching the border.
This is the first time in 40 years that I've seen this. I've never seen this before. It hadn't been done before, and the reason they do that is because they do not want any of these people, any of these refugees, to put even their toe on U.S. territory.
Angelica and Sophie wait under a hot sun to learn their fate, while a CBP official patiently answers questions.
Where is the capacity issue? Is it at the port of entry, about 100
It's a
yards
domino
that way?
effect, man. There's lots of places within the United States where after we process them for their claim, that are other family residential centers. We are following right now the existing protocol, and that existing protocol is I am not going to allow an unsafe and inhumane situation in our detention areas.
With each minute, the temperature rises. So do Angelica's fears she won't be allowed to enter. But after more than an hour, a CBP official announces the families will be allowed to cross. It's just after 9 a.m. when Angelica and Sophie walk across the border and into the U.S. port of entry. CBP officials allow the media to document their journey right up until this point.
I have a suspicion that had we not been with them, that they would have been turned back, you know. And that's what has to change, because the law says they have a right. And in this particular case, these 2 particular families have got some very concrete basis for their claim for asylum, and they have suffered some very real violence.
And Amna joins me now from El Paso. So Amna, this is a harrowing story. How typical is it?
Well, look, there's a lot that's unique about Angelica's story, right? The vast majority of people who cross the border don't have an advocate escort. They don't have as much media attention as she and Sophie did today. But at the heart of her story, Judy, there are some common themes that are common across the vast majority of people we've heard who are also crossing the border, making similar claims, largely fleeing violence in their home countries in Central America. We know those three countries from which the vast majority of people come: El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. So there are definitely some common themes there. The thing, of course, that people worry about is what happens when the cameras aren't there, right? There are a number of reports of people who are making legal crossings, who are presenting themselves, saying that they want to claim asylum, and then, similar to what Angelica went through, being turned away, being prevented from entering the port of entry and making that claim. So that is right now what immigrants and human rights experts and advocates say is their chief concern. What happens when people aren't looking for the vast majority of folks seeking refuge here?
So it was interesting to note, Amna, that she knew that there was a policy at that point to keep families separated, to separate children from other family members, but she was coming anyway. This was a policy meant, among other things, to be a deterrent, but in this case, it wasn't that.
That's right. You know, Angelica, as we spoke to her in Juarez across the border, was well aware at the time the family separation policy was in place. She was aware as she was setting out from the Mexican side of the bridge this morning that policy was still very much in place. She considered her options, but for her, Judy, she says there wasn't really an option. And this is something we've heard for people who advocate for the vast majority of people fleeing violence in their home countries, where, by the way, the forces that are compelling them to flee have not changed. And that consideration is this: when you're home, as written in the poem by Warson Shire, you know, she says, "I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun." When your home holds for you what seems to be certain death, and the only option you have is then facing uncertainty and potentially crossing into a foreign land to see what happens for the possibility of saving your life or your family's life. People we've talked to say that's not really a choice at all. So it wasn't a deterrent in this case, and it remains to be seen if other deterrents would work similarly with these populations. Judy?
Well, that certainly came through in her face. Amna, and just quickly, in getting to know her, how was she by the end of the day?
Well, Judy, we should point out at this time she is still in government custody. That's not unusual for these cases, by the way. People even seeking asylum and making legal crossings are often in government custody for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. So we'll follow up on her story, of course. But right now she's being interviewed. They're assessing her claim. And even though she's made it across the border, look, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead for her and for a lot of people in her similar situation. We don't know if the paperwork she has is enough to prove guardianship of Sophie, so we don't know if they'll be separated or not. We don't know if she has enough behind her asylum claim to allow her to stay and for her claim to be adjudicated through the immigration courts. So even though one hurdle has now been crossed for them, there's still a great amount of uncertainty ahead. Judy?
Some really important reporting for us to see. Amna Nawaz, thank you.